Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea Time History Chat Live. I hope you are all well. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about Roman Britain and some of my favourite places to visit. And I've picked them to be sort of geographically spread so that wherever you might be visiting in the UK, well, really in England and Wales, that you will have a place where you can go. Now, this is really loud in my ears, so I hope this isn't too blasting for you. Um, so, thank you so much if you are joining me live. I am streaming live on YouTube and Facebook, which I do every week at 3 p.m. UK time. That is, if I am here. And actually, next week will be. I will be here, and then the week after I'm on tour, but I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Um, if you're listening or watching on the catch up, then thank you so much for doing that. You might be listening on the podcast. And if you are, I will do my best to describe anything that I'm putting up on the screen because I have a few photos as usual. So, like I say, we're going to be having a little travel around Roman Britain today. So, thank you so much for joining me. I can see a few of you joining me now. Yes, thank you for your support. If you're watching this, please do give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel on YouTube if that's where you're watching, and I don't know, make a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. That would be really good. So, Roman Britain is one of my favourite topics. I know we cover the Tudors quite a lot on this channel, but I do British history. It's not by all means only restricted to the Tudors, and the Roman period is one of my favourites. It is, of course, 4 centuries-ish long, and so that's like saying I'm going to know the ins and outs of everything which happened between 1600 and the year 2000. It's a massive period of time, but there is actually quite a we're sport for choice as to places to go to have a look at remains of Roman Britain here in England and Wales, but also not just the number of them, but the variety of them. So we have the remains of villas, so private houses. We have the remains of forts, of towns, of public swimming baths, of forums, of amphitheatres, of barracks, if I haven't already said that. So I'm going to pick out a few. I did do a couple of streams about Roman Britain back in March, which you can go back and have a look at as well. But I am, as I said, in the run up to my final tour of the season. We're doing the Rise of the Tudors, so I'm actually only 10 days out from doing that tour. So hence why I've chosen a topic that that I can probably hopefully do a little bit off the top of my head. So if you want to follow along that tour, the Rise of the Tudors tour, I will be posting on Instagram. And the week after, when I come back, I will let you know where we went, what we did, give you a bit of a review. But actually, next week, I'm not going to forget to mention this, but I will mention this now. Next week, I will be joined live on Tea Time History Chat Live by Gareth Russell, the historian, author, presenter, who is our tour historian on that tour. Gareth is a fantastic historian. He's also a fantastic host. A few of you in the chat have been on tour with us, and so know what kind of person he is. But he will be joining me next week to talk about the tour, and and we will be going through where we're going to be going, why we're going there, how it's relevant to the story, and so that will be fun. So do join me next week for that. So, I also want to give a shout out, please, to it's Stacey and I haven't written it down. I will find out, to my new patrons. So over in Patreon, we had our book club meeting last Sunday, and we discussed Helen Carr's book on John of Gaunt. And Oh, Marianne says, don't forget engaging writer. Well, indeed, historian and author. Gareth is absolutely fabulous. So Stacey and Catherine, I must give a shout out to. They are my newest members of my Patreon. Yes, so in Patreon at the moment, what we've got going on, book club last Sunday was great. So that means if you want to join, there's the recording of that book club, which you can watch back and you can join in the conversation if you happen to have read the book but just couldn't make the meeting. It also means that we're on to our next book, and that is this one. It's John Guy and Julia Fox's book, Hunting the Falcon, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, The Marriage That Shook Europe. So we will be getting together and discussing that on the 10th of November. So yeah, if you're interested in that, we're also if you want to join a book club and you want to say in what the books are going to be, that is what I'm asking for at the moment. So if you join my Patreon, patreon.com/British history, or you're already in my Patreon, then do please put forward your suggestions for books, and we'll put them all together in a long list and take a vote and choose our books for next year. We've done 6 this year. So yeah, we normally can fit in 6 in the year. Okay, let's get on to Roman Britain. Is my sound okay, everybody? Because I sound very echoey to myself, which if it's okay for you, that's fine, but it's kind of distracting if I think it's distracting you. Okay, so I have picked out a few places. And like I say, the reason I've chosen these places is, as you'll see from the map, those who are watching, those of you listening on the podcast, these are spread out across across England and into Wales. Oh, good. Thank you, Marianne. So that wherever you are, if you're visiting the UK or you're in the UK, you're interested in Roman history, there's something that you can go and pop along and see. So some of these are near other things. A lot of them are actually out on their own a bit, which is interesting because if you think about how significant they were during the Roman period, and yet some of them seem very remote nowadays. So London, there's actually quite a lot of Roman remains left in London, so I'll do a little bit on that. We're going to go over to Wales for Caerleon, which I've mentioned before, but it's worthy of another mention. Chedworth Roman Villa, again, which I think I've mentioned before, but I will mention again. Wroxeter, Verulamium, which is now modern day St Albans, and then we'll go up to Hadrian's Wall for Housesteads and Chesters. So if you're watching for the first time, this really is this is a great resource for, right, I want to do a look at Roman Britain and I can go and look at these places. So let's have a little look at some of them. Like I say, because I am almost on tour, a lot of my time is being spent preparing for that. So some of this is off the top of my head. So let me give you some places in London because people are always asking me, I've got an afternoon in London before my flight, or, when I get in, what can I do? Now, obviously, this is all Roman, but actually, you're in London. London, of course, if it's got Roman history, has got every layer of history afterwards as well. Let me start off with the Temple of Mithras, which is the picture on the left-hand side. If you're watching now, it's underneath the Bloomsbury building. You can Google it and find where it is. It's free to get in. They have, as you walk in at street level, they have a cabinet with many of the artifacts which were found during the excavation when they discovered this temple. And I really, really enjoy the way they project this this site. You go down, it feels like you're far underground. You're probably just one story underground, I don't know. And you've just got the footings of this temple. And they think it's a temple to Mithras because of things that are found on the site. Mithras is this Roman god. And The way they so sorry, but you've just got the footing. So the way they do it is they have these lights, which if you're looking at the photograph, you can see m- make a wall. So these lights, they manage to create create the wall, so you can get an idea of the scale of the building, the shape of it. It's quite small, and they're not completely sure, um, sort of what would have gone on other than it's a temple, but what exactly the process would have been for worship in here. So that's a free one to go to in the City of London. Look at the Bloomsbury building, you can find that. The picture in the middle is of a model of Londinium, so Roman London, which is actually in the crypt of All Hallows by the Tower. And if you're into your Tudor history, you will recognise All Hallows by the Tower as the church where people who are executed on Tower Hill, so this was few during the Tudor period and other periods, but during the Tudor period, who were taken to All Hallows as their sort of initial resting place. And in the crypt is this really lovely model. So let me tell you a bit more about it. I'm not going to I'm not going to just try and remember. I want to actually find what I've done with my notes here. Because it's underneath. Oh, I haven't actually done it. Okay, fine. So I have. Here we go. So this model was created between 1928 and 1933, and it was donated to the church by Miss Tremaine. Her brother. Well, it's in remembrance of her brothers, and she had a man called Anthony Lowther create the model. And on this, when you so do go and see it if you're there. Also in the crypt is a Roman pavement, so you can see literally some Roman remains. They've got some artifacts in there as well, and they've got this model, which is coming up to 100 years old in its own right. When when this model was created, they hadn't discovered the amphitheatre, which I will come on to in a moment. So there's bits of this model that are inaccurate, but they were accurate in terms of the knowledge they had of Roman London at the time that it was made. The amphitheatre is actually sat underneath London Guildhall, which you might recall is the place where um, uh, Lady Jane Grey was tried. It was the place that Mary the First came to, and she gave a very rousing speech. She was the one who first mentioned being married to her people, to her kingdom, not her sister Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth learned from her. Anyway, that was at Guildhall. And when they were excavating for the Guildhall Art Gallery, which is the building, if you're looking at this photograph to the right, which looks a little bit more modern than the one facing you, they discovered the footings or the remains of the amphitheatre, which once you get into Roman history and you've visited different Roman cities, Rome itself, of course, being a perfect example, but it's repeated over and over again, kind of the layout or the elements of a Roman city which you would find or a Roman town. And an amphitheatre is a pretty stable um, uh, find in a city or town of a particular size. Um, so it had been a bit of a mystery as to where this was. So they discovered it, and it is now preserved in the basement of the Guildhall Art Gallery. You can go and see it, and again, they've done some sort of reinterpretation, and you can see there's not a lot left of it, but you can. I think there's the footings of a gatehouse. There's the sewerage, which any of you know my background. I used to work I used to work in sewerage, which is not sewage. Sewerage is the kind of transport of the effluent through to anyway. So but drainage, okay, drainage. Let's say that. And I actually find it really interesting because for all the um, pomp and I don't know um, ceremony and everything that goes on in somewhere like an amphitheatre or a palace or whatever, that's not it's not going to stay as somewhere people want to be if you don't get your drainage right. So anyway, there's still some of the wooden um, drainage channels that are there from the Londinium Amphitheatre, and you can see that in the preserved part of that, which is at the bottom of uh, the Guildhall Art Gallery, and outside. Uh, in the paving slabs, I always love this fact, and you'll have heard it from me before if you've been watching before. There is a distinction between the paving sort of right out front of the buildings, and then there's a black line, and then there's a more sandy coloured stone. The black line depicts the um the circumference, or the outside of yeah, the outside of the amphitheatre. So when you're outside of the Guildhall and the Guildhall Art Gallery, you can get an idea of just how large the Londinium Amphitheatre was. There are actually other places in London as well that you can see Roman remains. Of course, you've got the Roman Wall at the Tower of London. If you enter the Tower of London if you come into the tube station at Tower Hill and you go underneath the road, and you come out under the underpass, and you've got the Tower of London in front of you, and you would go round to the right to get to the entrance, you actually pass another Roman gateway, and there's another a piece of Roman wall. There's actually a few examples as you walk around the city. So, and is there anything else? There probably is other places. If you, I mean, the British Museum, I know it gets a bad rap, but if you want to go and see quite a lot about Roman Britain, Museum of London used to have quite a lot on Roman London, but I haven't been to it since it's reopened at Smithfield, so I can't tell you. But the British Museum certainly have some incredible artifacts and coins and mosaics. They are by far, though, not the only place. Like I say, I think we're quite spoilt for choice as to places to go for Roman Britain. I'm going to be doing a Roman Britain tour at some point in the future. If that is something that you would be interested in doing, please let me know. You can get on the waiting list by emailing us at office@britishhistorytours.com. Because as you can see from the original map that I put up, bearing in mind this is not exhaustive list of places we would go, not only do you get to absorb yourself in Roman Britain, but you get to travel the country, because it's it's actually a really great way of plotting a route around England and Wales to some of the most beautiful and interesting places. And of course, with a history going back 2,000 years, it's all um, very exciting. Last week, was it? No, it was the week before, wasn't it? I was in Hatfield House, so if you missed that last week, I was talking about the rainbow portrait, which is hung in Hatfield House in Hertfordshire. And while I was down in that area, because it's quite a drive for me, I went over to St Albans to see the amphitheatre. I've been there before, but as it is with these places, I get attached and I want to go back and see them. What was lovely is the amphitheatre. I actually accidentally found the amphitheatre the first time I went. I was looking for a place called Old Gorhambury Hall, which was I'm gonna have to remember this off the top of my head now. It was the residence, a very, very grand house of one of Elizabeth I's courtiers. And I'm not going to guess, I can't remember. But anyway, that Old Gorhambury Hall, you can find it's in St Albans, and you can find it's quite a walk from from where you have to park. But while I was looking for that, which I did find, I'll talk to you about that in another. I'll do that in another live, because it was very interesting. Um, I I literally walked past and I was like, "That looks like a Roman amphitheatre," and it was. So St Albans, um, was renamed in the Anglo-Saxon period, but before that it had been, uh, well, yeah, Verulamium. Before that, so there's Iron Age settlement here. It was called something similar. Can't quite remember. Let me have a look because I did look. Oh, Verlamion. So there we go. And then it's sort of Latinized to Verulamium. But yeah, so this area has an incredibly long history of occupation. Um, it was burnt down twice during the Roman period. One time of which was down to the Boudiccan revolt. But this amphitheatre that they've got here, so um, it's a site slightly larger than just the amphitheatre. They've excavated to one of the sides of it, and they found the footings of what they believe to be shops, and I think one of them's an ironmonger's, and also maybe a residence. There's a shrine which is underground, which is I couldn't take a photograph of it because there's a grill, which is yes, Laurie, the same St Albans as from the Wars of the Roses. Yeah. So this is why a tour of Roman Britain is like a tour of Britain, basically, because everywhere we would go, bear in mind on this map at the moment, I haven't got York, which we would go to, or where else? Come on, there's other places. But yeah, it's the same St Albans. Yeah, there's an underground shrine which I couldn't take a photograph of because the grill it is obviously it's sort of it's of a standard which you could stand on, walk on, and so it's quite uh, dense, and so couldn't take a photograph through it. But basically, there was this underground, if you imagine a pit, but it's stone lined, and in at the end of it, there was like an alcove where there would have been a statue. So hence why they know it's a shrine. So that's also on this site as well. And when I went there, so a couple of weeks ago, they're in the middle of a summer program of which I hope the weather stayed okay for them because it went really bad the last couple of weeks. But still in a summer program of I think they were putting Shakespeare plays on in there. So they're still using the amphitheatre as an entertainment um, space, which I just think is fantastic. So if you want to go to St Albans to the amphitheatre, then you park not too far away, and there is a museum there, and in there is loads and loads of artifacts that they found, and a lot more information on the entire layout of Verulamium. It was a massive city. I think it was the third largest. I say city. I think it's the third largest town. Not quite sure the exact distinction at that time. City now has a cathedral, so I'm not quite sure what the distinction is in Roman times. But a lot more information. So this massive town, third largest in Roman Britain. So that's well worth a look as well. I've forgotten where I was going to next. Oh yes, the place where I have to write down phonetically how to pronounce it because I want to say Caerleon, which because when I first saw this, I thought it's probably French named something, something French name, and Leon will be lying. No, it's not. It's a right, okay. Now Nathan, Armin, might tell me I've got this wrong, but I tried to write it down phonetically after I got him to tell me how to pronounce it. K Leon. So there you go. So hopefully I've got that right. Which is actually Welsh for Legion Fortress. So it was named Isca during the Roman period. And when we are on the Rise of the Tudors tour from the 21st of September, we're staying near Caerleon. And we're actually staying at a golfing resort, and one of the rooms that we're going to be using is called the Isca Suite. So I was glad I knew why that was because otherwise it would just be a random name. But yeah, so this was Iska, and it is um, one of the I think it's one of yeah, the best preserved sites, although actually I have to say we are, like I say earlier, quite spoilt for choice. But this we have an amphitheatre, which you can see there on the photograph, a full one. There are still steps there. There is still an archway there. So you can literally go in the footsteps of people who were there. There is a pool house. So yeah, no, I think it was an entire bathing facility actually. So this was a barracks. Um, like it's like the Welsh have called it. It's a legion fortress, and there are barracks a walk away. So you get an idea of literally of the lay of the land of this legionary fortress, which was one of the largest. It was one of the key ones. I think it was Caerleon, York, and Chester. I think were the main ones. There might have been another one. I can't remember. Um, so to be able to see and walk around and get a feel for how how everything was placed, where people would be going for their entertainment, for where they slept, for um, their hygiene and exercise. Hygiene was a big thing for the Romans. These, um, public baths were one of these things you can expect to see in not just a town or a city, but in a fort or in a barracks. Well, in a fort near a barracks, because hygiene and health was seen as important, which I know we kind of scoff at when we talk about the soap on a stick, which they use to clean themselves after going to the toilet. But overall, they're keen on health and hygiene, and indeed, it was one of the things that they felt um, differentiated them from the people they would conquer. Um, the the heathens, the not heathens, that wouldn't be the right word, but the barbarians. So yes, very important to them, and Caerleon is a great place to find an example of that in terms of what would happen at a barracks site. But we have some more as well. I'm next going to take you to Chedworth. So Chedworth is in Gloucestershire. So if I go back to the original map, we've gone London, we've gone over to the south of Wales, and now we're having well, actually we've popped over to St Albans first, which is just north of London. Then we went all the way over to South Wales, and now we're going to Gloucestershire, which is it borders onto Wales, or it does for the purposes of me explaining where it is. I So this was a private villa. They're not. It's not clear who lived here. Clearly, someone of means. It was a very luxurious place. On the if you're looking at this, and I will try and explain it for those of you listening on the podcast, they've got this little model which I found really useful. So I took a picture of it. You've almost got a double courtyard. So like we're used to seeing in the palaces of the sort of medieval and Tudor times, you've got an inner court at the top. Um, it's a little bit also like the Norman um, way of setting up their Motte and Bailey castles. You've sort of got an inner court and an outer court, or an inner bailey and an outer bailey. And they had this here at Chedworth. So you've got the private sort of family area, and where they would sleep, where they would bathe, where they would entertain. And then you've got this larger outer area where the functions were going on, the horses would be kept, etc., etc. And at the top right-hand corner of the entire site is a shrine, and this is where the water for the site would come in. So um, there's natural springs in this area. It's at part. The Cotswolds is quite a sprawling area, but this is part of the Cotswolds. If you drive there today, it feels very remote. I remember driving there thinking whether trying to work out whether I'd got it right or not, but um, you get there and the car and it opens up and there's loads of cars there and there's tea rooms and everything. Oh, okay. And you hadn't seen anybody for the previous 10 minutes coming on the road, but um, so yeah, so there's this shrine in the top right hand corner. This is where the water comes in. Shows there's so much more. I mean, I wonder actually at what point we became so disjointed to our natural environment. That's what I see anyway. And I was lucky because I worked in the water industry, so I have a big respect for how we literally just have to turn on a tap and we've got clean water. But we know that water was not taken for granted by our ancestors. After the Roman period, when we go into the Anglo-Saxon period, we have places like wells, um, named after the fact that there's springs there. The Roman baths at Bath were already a sacred place. I've not been mentioning those today, but there's another site. They were already, a sacred place. Anyway, this place, this Chedworth Roman villa, whoever lived here, they had their own private shrine, it's I think it's just telling that it's where the water source comes into the entire site. So that's the highest part of the site as well. They had their own private sort of dining area, and where we see on other sites public baths where you'd have a bit. I mean, it is quite like how we have spa facilities today. So you'd have your steam rooms and your dry heat rooms, so your sauna. You'd have we don't tend to bother with the cooling rooms, although there is a plunge pool where I go now, which I do make myself do. There's pools, etc. Here, they didn't have a swimming pool as such, as far as I remember, but they did have the series of hot down to cold rooms and a plunge pool. And the mosaics on those floors many of them are still there to be seen. So there is the main part of the site, I suppose, the main draw of the site is this bathing, dining, entertainment complex, which has the dining room and it has this sort of private series of rooms for relaxing and whatever they did. And the National Lottery Heritage Fund, I believe, paid for a wooden structure a building basically to be put over the top so that they are now preserved. So it's a wonderful site. It's a great one to go to. That is well off the beaten path, like I say, but still has a tea room. So I think that's quite a good combination, isn't it? But this is an example of a villa towards the end of the Roman occupation. Bear in mind, we know it came to an end. They wouldn't have known it was coming to an end, but also demonstrates the varying changes in fortune depending on who you were, what you were doing, and whereabouts in the country you were. So that's Chedworth. Now Wroxeter. So now we're going a little farther north. We're in Shropshire, and Wroxeter is one of my favourites because I think it's a surprise. Again, it is now remote, pretty remote. You get there, you're on the top of a hill. You're surrounded by farms. Can't really see the nearest town, and yet this was Roman Britain's fourth largest city. And it's so there's the remains here of a basilica, a forum, a shopping sort of centre, and of course the bathhouse that we always get. And they have recreated a Roman villa on site as well, which so on this site there is a piscina, so an outdoor swimming pool, which according to the information on this site seems that it was built and then abandoned because of the weather. I have not managed, as you can see from my photographs if you're looking, um, I've been to Roxeter on a number of occasions, and it's I've not managed to go there when it's nice weather yet. It feels remote. It feels like you're on top of a hill. And this outdoor piscina was abandoned because of the weather, because of the English weather. And when you go around the recreated Roman villa, which I believe was done for a maybe BBC documentary quite a while ago now, but um, it is actually built on the site of the Forum, not where it would originally have been, but it does have an air of absurdity about it, being where it is, being in the English weather. Now, I'm not a climate historian by any stretch of the imagination, but I find it interesting, um, when climate is mentioned, when the weather is mentioned, um, because of course over the over 2,000 years it may have changed and come back and gone, blah 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 blah. Uh, but it does feel a little bit absurd having a villa, and this is based on ones that would have been in this city, having a villa on the top of a hill, which is built around the idea of outdoor space. So the corridor, what I would call a corridor, but it's probably not a corridor if it's on the outside, is it? Um, and and that gives you access to all the rooms. So the rooms don't lead into each other. The rooms all lead out onto a covered walkway, and that's how you get from one room to the other. So it is this sort of semi-outdoor living, this little al fresco living, which honestly does feel a little bit absurd on the top of a Shropshire hill. But there you go. Maybe it was slightly warmer, or maybe they just lived for those 2 weeks of summer that we get. We only got 2 weeks this year. Luckily, it was the ones that when I was camping. Okay, let's go up to Hadrian's Wall, which I haven't mentioned before, or I might have done in a very old show, but I didn't mention these when I was talking last March. So I'm going to pick out two of the places you can go. Now, Hadrian's Wall is, I think it's about 73, well, it was 73 miles long when it was built, and it's a very popular hikers destination because you can have a go at walking the route of it. It's not all exposed by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of it has been buried. Some of it has been built over. Quite a lot of it, I think, still exists in some way, shape, or form. It did lose quite a lot of its stonework to building work, in subsequent centuries. I think it's oh goodness, there's a monastery that's name has flew out of my head that begins with an N, I'm pretty sure. And there's stonework there which has clearly been taken out of the Roman wall and used. So the fact that any of it still exists is quite good. But there's two sites along it that I would thoroughly recommend going to. But it is possible to do quite a number of them because um, they're quite close together. Um, and when I put together a Roman Britain tour, we will definitely we've got to go to Hadrian's Wall. We've got to go to Hadrian's Wall. And the two sites that I'm going to mention today are Chester's and Housesteads, and for two different reasons. So Chester's is the best example of a cavalry fort. So a cavalry, obviously, with their horses, and so the barracks here are different to what you might find at Caerleon. Oh yes, Amanda, I think it is Lanercost. Thank you. So don't bring it with an N at all. I don't know where I got that from. Probably Northumberland, which is where we are when we're looking at Hadrian's Wall. Yes. Anacostia is amazing because it has the full scale, full size um, uh, walls, if that is the right one I'm thinking of. Um, and yeah, so Chester's was a cavalry fort, and so the barracks were set out differently. Like I say, they actually had rooms for the soldier, um, and that they were paired up with a room for their horses. So each one would be paired up with a room for their horse in sets of three. So three men, three horses. Um, so back to what I said about hygiene. However, Chester's is also one of the best examples of a baths at a barracks. So um, again, it shows that they were very mindful of. I mean, they're in a barracks. They've learnt, I imagine, that if you want to keep your soldiers healthy, because if you don't, any disease is going to rip through your entire group very quickly. So, um, yeah, I actually don't think it's too much of a stretch to understand why they had a good idea of hygiene, even if they didn't understand germ theory. They kind of didn't need to. Um, so yeah, so Chester's amazing example of like I say, a cavalry fort, um, really well preserved baths, uh, which were buried for goodness knows how long. They're right next to a river. Sorry, I need to sneeze. It's okay. They go down to they're right next to the river, so it's a very pretty spot. Um, this is also, and this is not unique, but and I haven't put a picture up of it actually. I should have done. Um, one of the drawing in features of this site apparently is the um, stone in around about the centre of the site, as far as I remember, of a phallus. Now, that is actually quite a common. I'm pretty sure there's one at Roxton as well, actually, but pretty common um, sign, emblem, whatever that you see around the Roman Empire. It's not necessarily, I suppose it depends on where it is, a sign, a sort of fertility symbol. It was a sign of strength and sort of bravery. It's not sort of the titillating um, uh, thing that we would think of a phallus now. So there you go. So there's a really good example of one of that. I mean, it still looks crude, I have to say. It's not like I'm not quite sure how you would make it more artistic, actually. But anyway, that's Chester's. Halstead's is a another fort, but it's slightly different setup. So I mean, it's not a cavalry fort, so there's that. Um, and it where the soldiers were based they were supposed to be based inside, but the families went with them. And so there were actually there's quite a lot of evidence of um, buildings outside of the protective wall of the fort, where the families might live, um, and where other sort of um, um, shops and things like that might be that would support the 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 soldiers. Um, there's a granary, remains of a granary here, and that's not something that you would necessarily find in other sites across the Roman Empire. So, I said in a city, a fort, a town, there are particular elements that you would expect to see. You would expect to see, um, excuse me, sniffing. I'm so sorry. You would expect to see particular elements of, but in a barracks where the soldiers would sleep, you would expect to see the commanding officers' lodgings. You would expect to see gates. Um, um, you would expect to see the kitchens. At Housesteads, you've also got a granary, and this would have been seen across northern England especially. But basically, because of the damp environment, I've already mentioned weather before, when they stored grain, there needed to be more of an airflow because of the damp environment. So where you've got on other sites, the Romans knew how to. They knew about underfloor heating. They knew how to heat a room, and they would use the hypercaust. So these are floors that have gaps underneath, and that the floors are held up with sort of stacked columns of tiles, and hot air would circulate. This was the same at these would be the same at the baths, say in Bath. They would be the same at the baths in Caerleon. They were even the same at the private bathing suite at Chedworth Roman Villa. You see these hypercourse, and that would have been similar idea. I don't know if they pumped hot air or it's just to have air circulating, but that would have been the same idea here at Housesteads in the granary store to keep that grain from getting mouldy. I don't know if it worked. Can get pretty damp up there on the northern frontier. This was Hadrian's Wall, named after the Emperor Hadrian, who actually did come to Britain. He ordered that this wall be built. It's always put down as AD 122. It's there or thereabouts. He may have been. He may have been. He may have come to inspect it, so had already sent instructions for it to be built. He may have come and said, "Okay, fine. We're not going to be expanding anymore. We're going to consolidate," which actually was a bit of a change in tact underneath Hadrian's rule compared to his predecessors. They were still trying to push and push and push. And Hadrian had a different outlook. He decided that maybe consolidation and just getting their house in order where it was was the best policy. So that's how come we have Hadrian's Wall. I'll just mention we've got the Antonine Wall, which was in use. It's much further north. If you have a look, if you have a look, if you're looking on, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, and you see the map, you can see that Hadrian's Wall is at the sort of narrowest part of that stage of the country, and then the Antonine Wall is the next smallest, slimmest area. Because of course, if you're going to build a wall, you don't want to be building it any more than you need to. It took 10 years to build Hadrian's Wall, and the Antonine Wall was in use for about 20 years before, again, the Romans just gave up on expansion into Scotland. Scotland as a country didn't exactly exist, but the tribes that lived there were not having any of it, basically. So Hadrian's Wall became what it was, and then became really more of a control it was a protection mechanism. It was a control for people and goods going through, and it it gave a physical boundary between the Roman Empire and what they called the barbarians. So others, basically. Barbarians, that referred to them, it's a way of othering anyone who's outside of the empire. And I think there was probably a bit of well, I don't know why you wouldn't want to be part of us. We've got we give a bread allowance, and we provide public baths, and we provide law and order, and so they actually, it wasn't all about our way, or but they kind of didn't understand why people wouldn't want in. But yeah, so there's just two. It's the wall as well, I should say, that gave George, gosh, what was his name, who made Game of Thrones? George, why can't I remember his name? Yeah, he visited the wall in 1981, I think it was. Martin. It's because he's got two first names. I'll blame that. George R.R. Martin. He visited the wall. I think it was in 1981. Thanks. Thank you, people. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in and telling me. Yeah. Um, and that was his inspiration for the wall in Game of Thrones, where you've got sort of the people from one side of the wall, and then out there's this mystery, isn't there? Sort of after the wall, these others are out there in this cold, bleak wilderness. They have no, it's an inferior place to be. They're inferior people. Um, oh, he stole the RR from Tolkien. Oh dear. So yeah, so Hadrian's Wall. So there you go. It's a bit whistle stop, but those places. So if you're visiting the UK, like I say, and you want to see something of Rome and Britain, then those are nicely spread out places. Um, I'm going to be putting together a Rome and Britain tour. So, like I say, if you're interested, it's a brilliant way of exploring the country, let alone anything else. But even before you get into the Roman history, do let me know. You can email me at office@britishhistorytours.com and get put onto the waiting list for that, and we will get in touch with you. Um, Before I go, remember if you missed last week's, I was talking about the rainbow portrait of Elizabeth I after my visit to Hatfield House, where it is now rehung after being restored. So you can go and check that out. And if you are interested in becoming part of a historical book club, that's just one of the things that is available in my Patreon, patreon.com/British history. We have Hunting the Falcon as our next book. This is John Guy and Julia Fox's book about Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and their marriage and the effect that it had on Europe. We're meeting to discuss that book on the 10th of November. You can join from anywhere in the world. We do it on Zoom. And in fact, I think most of we have people we definitely have people from around the world. A lot of you from America, which is fabulous. America and Canada. And we are taking suggestions for the long list for Book Club 2025. That's the list on which we then vote and decide on the 5 or 6 books that we're going to read in 2025. And just a reminder that if you want to join me tonight, I'm with the History After Dark Girls on YouTube. So that's YouTube /history. I think we're _after_dark, something like that. Look us up. We're the ones with the dark logo with the microphone. We're tonight going to be discussing Edward the Confessor, and it will be Dr. Kat's last show for a few weeks because she goes off next week to have her baby. So join us tonight for Edward the Confessor, and join me next week for the last Tea Time Live before I go on my final tour of the season, where I will be joined live by historian and author, an all-round fantastic man, Gareth Russell. So hopefully you can join me same time next week. And I hope you enjoyed that. I will hope to see you tonight or next week or soon. But anyway, take care, everybody, and have a great day. All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.